A very warm welcome and good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us. Welcome to Skrum. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Roebuck and I am the Marketing and Communications Manager at Skore. If you don't know what Skore is the process improvement software platform designed to be used by everyone, and we are hosting the Scrum event this evening. My role this evening is just to take a few minutes of your time, basically just to run through a few housekeeping guidelines and the agenda, and then I promise I won't take too long and I'll pass you over to the main event, which is what you're all here for anyway. So first of all, as I said, welcome to Scrum. Scrum is our online networking and ideas sharing event. It was started by our founders as a way for like-minded professionals to get together, explore themes, share ideas, network, and hopefully to learn something new. It's something that historically we did face-to-face, but in recent years we've brought online to some great success, actually. And again, it's fantastic to see so many people here from all over the world. So thank you for attending. The networking is a really, really important part of Scrum. And in that sense, I'd really ask that if you are able to, if you can keep your camera on, that's fantastic. It really, really helps, especially at the end, to see who we're talking to. On the same theme, however, if we could ask that you stay on mute until the networking, so as not to disturb the speakers. It is really important, though, that this is seen as a networking event, not just some sort of webinar. So we really want you to get involved and to share your thoughts and ideas. So I would ask that, during the talks, if you have a comment or a question, if you can use the Zoom chat at the bottom to post any questions or comments. We are monitoring the chat. We'll make sure that any questions that you have will get passed over to our speakers at an appropriate moment. In fact, if you could use the chat now just to say hi, maybe introduce yourself, say where you're from, that would be fantastic, and we can get that going. Just a little bit as well around the agenda for this evening. So as I said, in a moment, I will finish and I'll pass you over to Craig. So for those of you who don't know, Craig Willis is the CEO of Skore, and he's going to kick off this evening by just exploring the themes around business analysis, art or science. And from that, we will then move on to our panel discussion. Our panel discussion is hosted by Chris Green, who is the CCO of Skore. And we're really, really pleased to have Amanda Budler from Analyze Consulting and Adrian Reed from Black Metric Business Solutions with us this evening. The eagle-eyed of you may notice that Amanda is a new addition. We were going to have Sarah with us, Sarah Teese, but unfortunately she can't make it this evening. So a big thank you to Amanda for stepping in and helping us out with this. And we're really, really excited to hear what she and Adrian have got to share with us this evening. And then finally, after that, we'll move into our networking rooms. So we will break into smaller groups, and then you'll have more of an opportunity to discuss themes and have a chat with everyone else. So we're looking at around a finish about 6:30 p.m. UK time is the plan, really. Now, while I've got you, I'd just also like to give you a little update on Skore and some of the things that we've been up to recently. It's been a few months since our last Scrum event. First of all, I'd just like to mention our new customer onboarding toolkit. So this is something that originally I think we looked at for new customers as a way to help them get onto Skore, but we've really, really realized the great value that a lot of our Skore users, I think, would find really, really useful. Essentially, it's a great way to take advantage of a lot of the assets and strategies that we have to get the most out of Skore. So perhaps if you're introducing Skore to team members or a new client, it could be something that would be really useful for you. It's a great way of getting the most out of Skore successfully in the quickest amount of time. So if you think that's something that you might be interested in, please feel free to send us an email or contact us via the community to know more about that. At the same time as well, just really a reminder about the kind of wealth of information that we have on our website that you might find interesting. For example, a lot of the case studies we've released one this week with Carte Blanche, the leading cards and gifts group retailer in the UK. It's a great way to look at some of the different ways that Skore's used. We've also released the first in our series of Skore Spotlight, which is looking at business analysis and professionals in the business analysis era and how they kind of work in the industry. So again, that could be something that you find interesting. All of this is found on our website, or if you'd like a PDF, you can get in touch with me via the email address and I can send you over copies if that's of interest. Most importantly, though, I'm really excited to be able to share with you a first kind of glimpse of Skore Spinnaker, which is something that I've mentioned before in our updates, and you will have also seen mentioned on the community. So for those of you who don't know, Skore Spinnaker is the next evolution of our Skore platform. It's a new user interface that we'll be releasing shortly. And I have been allowed to talk about two of our exclusive new features that we will be releasing. So firstly, we have a great opportunity to have a workspace-wide search function. So in Skore Spinnaker, you will be able to search across all of your processes and roles in your Skore workspace. You won't be limited to one process. We also have another great feature coming up, which will be our workspace-wide analysis. And this again will give you the opportunity to have reporting and insights across your Skore workspace, and you won't be confined to one process for that data and information. And these are just two of the great new features that will be coming up in Skore Spinnaker. Our CTO, Colin Clavery, actually will be hosting our drop-in on Friday, where he'll be talking a lot more about Skore Spinnaker and a lot of these features. I've only just mentioned two, there are lots more that will be available. So if you haven't come along already, I'd really recommend coming along on Friday morning. It's on our community. Hopefully somebody will put a link to the community in the chat so you can join up. The community itself is just a great place to go and meet other people, learn more about Skore, ask questions. It's free to join, and also there's absolutely no obligations around it, so you're welcome to have a look. But otherwise, come along. We hope to see you on Friday at 9:30 for that drop in, that exclusive first look at Skore Spinnaker. And that's it. I promise you there's no more. I'm going to pass you over now to Craig Willis, our CEO, and he is going to kick off this evening's entertainment. Thank you very much, Craig.
Thanks very much. Really nice to see everybody here today. I was going to start off with a bit of a warm-up exercise, but actually I think we had quite a nice chat at the beginning anyway, but I'll give you the opportunity to join in. I think if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, you may have had the chance to take a bit of a break this summer, or at least I hope you had a chance to have a bit of a break from work and perhaps even get away somewhere on holiday. I was certainly lucky enough to do so. While we were having our break, one of the things that I saw was a signpost that had been translated from another language into English. And I can't remember the exact wording, but my wife and I saw it together and it made us chuckle. And so afterwards, we kind of were thinking about this and thinking, what other examples are there? Because we've seen quite a few. I come from a multilingual family, so we often see these sorts of things. So we sort of had a bit of a play around and look at different examples of where we've seen translations that have gone wrong. So I thought, if you've ever had if you've got examples that you've seen where they haven't kind of, translations that you've seen in public places or whatever that haven't quite gone as well as the person who put them together intended, and they're not too rude or too long to explain, it'd be quite fun to pop them in the chat window for others to share with you. But as I said, we spent a bit of time kind of having a bit of a laugh and joke about it and looked at some of the examples that we found online and places we've seen these sorts of things. And for those of you who know me well will know that I'm one of my main passions in life is food. So you won't be surprised that some of the examples that I share are all food related. Everything from just random words that have seemingly been picked out of the air to put on a menu, to some that even have an attempt at putting some sort of grammar structure around the words that describe what's on the menu. One that really made me chuckle was this one, because I can see that when somebody typed cream of vegetable soup into the translator in Spanish, they had actually, the translator had picked it up as the verb rather than the noun, cream of vegetable soup, to create some quite hilarious examples in English, German, and in French. But sometimes you see things that are actually quite bizarre, and even when you've had a bit of a laugh about them, they kind of can put you off ordering anything else from the menu. And then this one I saw, which also made me chuckle, was Paul, bless him, even if he has left us for good, I just hope to goodness that they haven't used him in the meatballs that this was sitting next to. But whatever food that you're going to choose or select from any of the menus, what I can suggest is try to avoid the carpet. It's really not that good. So I'm sure some of you here will recognize the point that's behind this, or the serious point that's behind this. A lot of business analysts will describe themselves as the bridge between the business and the IT department, or the translator between those. And just like a language translator, translating the needs and requirements of the business into something that a technical team can use comes with a great deal of responsibility. A translator's job is not to copy text into something like Google Translate and hit a button. And we know from a lot of these examples that, as good as Google Translate is, it still has a way to go. What a language translator is doing is really trying to understand the context and the intent in the source language, and then transfer that to the target language so it makes sense to the audience there as well. And that's very, very similar to what a business analyst is trying to do in terms of trying to translate the needs and requirements from the business into something that the technical team could use in order to implement. But I actually think that a business analyst goes one step further than what a language interpreter or translator would do. So I think it's the responsibility also of the analyst to not only understand that context and the intent from what the business is telling them, but also often to challenge their thinking and to present possible solutions that the business might not have thought of, or different angles on the problem that they're dealing with before it gets translated in something that the technical team could potentially use to build on. Now, I'll just hold that thought there and come back to it in a second, because I just want to think a little bit about the background and the history of business analysis. So the audience here at our Scrum events is often very broad, and I realize that a lot of you come from different parts of the change and transformation spectrum, not just specifically business analysis. Now, I first came across this as an activity in the late 1990s working as a software developer, and I often found myself in the role of actually going out and talking to the business and trying to understand what they want. When they say they want to put a button on a form, what do they actually mean by that? Why do they want the button on there? What's driving that need or requirement, to really make sure that what we build is the right thing for them. It wasn't really until the mid-2000s that I became aware of the term business analysis and and business analyst. So it prompted me to do a little bit of investigation to just find out a little bit more about the history of business analysis. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but this practice has its roots in software engineering, and right back as far as the 1940s, when computers were the size of a house and it was only governments that could afford to build them. Engineers still needed to understand the process that the manual process that humans would go through in order to make sure that the machines could deliver the outcomes that they needed. But there was, it really started to become something that was a more common requirement in the 80s and 90s with the explosion of computers on everybody's office desktop and in many people's homes. And of course, with the explosion in hardware came software. And I'm sure many of you here, especially in the 1990s and early 2000s, will have experienced really poorly implemented software systems that often made absolutely no sense whatsoever to what we were trying to do on a day-to-day basis. But I think business analysis and the role of the business analyst really started to formalize in the 2000s. And that you see that with organizations like the Project Management Institute, the British Computer Society starting to offer BA certifications. The IIBA, the International Institute for Business Analysis, was founded in 2003 in Canada, which was something that I didn't know before, but was quite interesting. And today, the IIBA counts over 30,000 members globally and with chapters in 40 different countries. And looking at their website, there's a quote on the website which I really, really liked, or not so much a quote, but a description of what business analysis is. Business analysis is the key to enabling change that drives project and business success. And I really, really like that. It's quite succinct, but also highlights how this as a role has changed over time. So while it has its roots in technology and software engineering, and obviously today technology is such a part of what we do, how we work, it's so much more than that now. It is really about understanding needs across the business, not just in a technical context. And if you get a chance, or if you're not already familiar with it, it's worth having a look at the IIBA website. They've got a really nice graphic that talks about or shows all of the different areas we see business analysis being used, and also all of the different specialisms and the different roles that you'll find within that. And this includes everything from business process management, customer experience, design thinking, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, cloud technology management, and so on. It's really such a broad area of expertise that people can really become experts or specialists in very specific areas, but also in an increasingly complex world, it just goes to show how important the role is. Now, having said that, one of the things that we see, and this is more anecdotally, from our clients over the last few years, is that there still seems to be maybe a misunderstanding or an underinvestment in this type of effort in projects. And we'll often have customers come to us going, well, we didn't have time to do that, or I've never heard of a business analyst before, so what do I need one for exactly? So this prompted me again to go and look at some data to see what others' experiences were. And perhaps surprisingly or unsurprisingly, it depends where you come from, there's actually quite a lot of research out there. I found some good papers from the Project Management Institute, but I picked on one which is from a company called IAG Consulting. I think it was quite simple, and it expressed the challenge quite clearly. They did this survey. This is going back probably 3, maybe 4 years, but I think it's still illustrative of certainly of what we're hearing today still. So they conducted this survey on 100 companies, and they looked at projects starting at about $250,000 upwards. And one of the things they found in the survey was that 68 of those companies did not invest in effective business analysis. So what do they mean by did not invest in? Well, this could mean anything from they just didn't do it. They just launched into projects and started trying to implement straight away without doing any sort of discovery and analysis up front. Or they had people doing this work, but they didn't have specific people in the role of a business analyst, or they didn't have any sort of formal training or tools to use to do this type of work. And what they found from those 68 companies was that in each of those cases, there was a 3 times more likely for them to experience complete project failures when they hadn't invested in this type of effort up front. So that in itself is quite significant. And when this is complete inability to deliver the outcomes that the project set out to do. They also looked at what that meant for projects that were delivered on time. And this was quite an interesting stat that comes out, is that of the companies that do invest, so the 32% of those companies, they found that when they looked at projects they ran, they would typically run 21% over the original estimate. So that's either over the original budget or over the original time that was estimated. Now, as many of you will know, we're a very optimistic species. So it's very, very common for us to underestimate the amount of time that a project may take to deliver. When you compare this with the other 68, it's eye-watering that they would typically see a 96% overshoot on the estimation of those projects and 96% over budget. Now, they had all of the companies and projects they looked at, the average project size was $3 million. So for every $3 million project, you're spending $6 million to deliver that project as a result of not having invested effectively in that business analysis up front. And they cite some reasons in the survey for that. And actually, again, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, it's not dissimilar to what we have heard anecdotally from many of the companies that we work with. It was poor quality tools or skills that they had in those roles, or people felt there was no time or budget available to do the upfront work. In some cases, people reported having had a poor experience with business analysis in the past, i.e. it didn't deliver the value that they expected it to deliver, so they thought there's no point in implementing it a second time or a third time or whatever. And another one that they mentioned was that some organizations simply just didn't see the value in using business analysts and business analysis upfront at the beginning of a project. So I think for us as a community, the big challenge is try to understand, how do we come together to improve these outcomes? How do we start to challenge this thinking? And I guess part of the question here and question for the panel will be, is this reflective of what you're seeing? Because it's certainly backed up what our own experience is. But when we start to move into how do we solve this, I want to bring back to that, that thought around the translation effort and what it means to be a business analyst. And, we want to explore, are we focused too much on the science side of business analysis and missing out on some of the art of helping people create better outcomes? Or is it perhaps that we're focused too much on the art and the science isn't good enough? Again, the question is, how do we as a team or a community aim to deliver better outcomes for both projects and businesses? And I will stop at that point and hand over to Chris.
Brilliant. Thanks for positioning such a great question there, Craig. So first off, bit of just a reminder that the chat is open. So if you want to put your question in the chat, I appreciate we can't put everyone off on mute. So as comments, questions, put them in the chat. If we have time throughout the discussion, we'll pull them out. If not, we'll grab them and pick them up at the end. And just to build a little bit on the introduction, we're joined by Amanda, who joins us from sunny South Africa. She's the Chief Operating Officer at Analyze, a boutique consultancy specializing in business process improvement, technology implementation, and change management. So quite a lot of experience there. And also Adrian from Blackmetric Business Solutions, so a very experienced business analyst. Probably recognize him on LinkedIn, if nothing else, if you follow any of the BA channels or anything like that. So he's been, again, not to go on about Adrian. I'm sure he'll drop some things he has experience in throughout the discussion. But there's 3 years of being president of the IIBA UK chapter, also editor, publisher, creator of the BA Digest, and Craig, who has already been introduced, and he's had the mic for a little while already. So let's get started then. So Craig, there's some huge stats there, yeah. So some stats that clearly show the importance of including business analysis or business analysts on projects. I'll put this to Amanda first, but in your experience then, why do you think businesses and projects still resist the need to include this sort of expertise in projects?
It's an interesting question, because considering, just looking back at that history you shared, Craig, it's not a new thing. It really shouldn't be. And, it still surprises me that so many people either don't understand it or don't understand the value. But I think a lot of it stems in the fact that, so it stems in exactly that, not actually understanding the value and not necessarily seeing the value on the specific projects that they've used them. I do also think changes in the way projects are being delivered are influencing it. So, for example, a move to Agile in many ways has actually made it harder or worse to prove that value, because the BA role is actually played down in those types of methodologies. And it's always something I've always, found very interesting and strange, because the need for that specific problem-solving role it doesn't go away. It's there, it's not going anywhere. And if anything, moving into a more digital way of working, it's even more important. So it does puzzle me, to be honest. And it is something that we find ourselves fighting with our clients on, specifically around investing in that time. And some of them get it and some of them don't, and it's really up to us to be able to prove and to show what that value is. That's really what we spend a lot of time doing.
Interesting. And Adrian, have you got any thoughts on the same question?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with what Amanda just said there. I think that's a really good summation. I think I'd add, this has been a perennial debate, and I remember once hearing someone exasperated saying in an organization, we can never find the time to do it right, but somehow we always find enough time to do it twice. And I think sometimes there's a strong element of that, where it's like there's something about technology and technology development that everyone wants to get closer to, right? Before we even know whether it's the right technology, before we even know whether it's the right solution, somebody's made a decision that we're going to implement X, and then everything becomes about implementing X. And this reminds me, if you ever go to your primary care physician or your GP in the UK, like what they hate is when you say, I'm ill with this, I want you to prescribe me that, right? Because that's not allowing them to see what the situation you're in, the context that you live in. Your symptoms might be because of you're stressed or whatever. And actually, for me, where BAs add value, or one of the areas where BAs add value, is helping organizations to understand that context, the bigger picture, understanding why change is necessary, and then potentially proposing different options, which may or may not be technology related. Because this is the other thing, right? You can implement the best technology in the world. If people don't use it, if people haven't been brought on that journey, you're not going to get any value whatsoever. So I think the way, or a way through this, and Amanda quite rightly said that Agile has clouded this discussion by its very nature. But you think about, what do senior execs want? Well, the ones that I speak to very much want agility. Now I say agility rather than agile as a set of methods, But in order for an organization to have agility, it needs to see its external environment, assess what changes are necessary, and effectively implement those changes in a way that's not just on time and on budget, which is old school measures, but are also on benefit, going to pay back, and are on strategy. And that is a gap which the business analysis I know, and the folks that are involved with it know, really, really can help. So I think it's about, as a community of analysts, us clarifying that message, but it is a really tricky message. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I'm not expecting a silver bullet answer in the good time we've got today, but it's fascinating to mention about the agile versus agility. Craig, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think there's a couple of things that I mentioned before, talking about the project over or underestimating the length of the project. And I said, we are optimistic beings. And I think one of the things that I've come across in my career quite often is, I'm going to say leaders. It's not always leaders. It can happen at various levels, but leaders are ultimately accountable for it. I think there's an overconfidence in their understanding of the current situation.
Yes.
And they'll often say, well, we know what the problem is. Right, but actually, we don't really know what we don't know. But because we don't know what we don't know, you can often jump to those conclusions, and then it's like, okay, and from my experience, you start with these. You're starting with the wrong assumption. So even if you do then apply some I call it lightweight analysis, because you're starting from that wrong place, you very quickly hit this kind of state where you're talking to people and they're going, oh yeah, well that's what they say, but actually what's happening is this over here. And then you've almost got to go back cap in hand to the leadership and say, please sir, can we have more time up front? And they say, no, we've already committed to this timeline, let's go ahead with it.
Fascinating. And then the title question is a bit simplistic about art or science, but obviously talking about this before the session, and there's probably not one definition, but if we were to assume that the science aspect is mastering the tools of business analysis, the methodologies and the principles behind it, and the art being knowing when and how to apply them, is one more important than the other in your experience? I'll let Adrian go first on this one. Is that even a fair definition of what?
Yeah, I don't know. I do. I mean, I think it's a really, really good question, and I think I and not just in this context, I struggle with the boundaries between art and science, because ultimately the sort of the boundaries are only there because we created them in a way. But what I would say is, I mean, if we take science to be, repeatable sets of practices which will apply in certain contexts, and if we take art to be a sort of meta way of understanding where those things fit, the thing I would layer on top of that is actually, you can be in my view, you could be the best business analyst in the world at writing user stories, writing use cases, drawing process models. But if you can't actually work with people, if you can't navigate politics and conflicts, exactly, you're not going to get very far. And yes, there are methods to help with those sorts of things. But that, if that's the understanding, if that's where we're sort of putting that on the art side, I have always taken the view, when I've been in a situation where I've been recruiting, that I'll with the right training, a capable candidate can learn the technical stuff. The people stuff, far harder. So I mean, I think it's a mixture, but I think the people stuff is so very important.
And back to the original question, if there's a lack of understanding of the value, it's all very well showing someone a report of the value, but how do you engage that at different levels in an organization, even knowing what battles to even go for in some sense?
And that's it. And that comes back to that question of value, because with value, it's value to who or to whom, because there are going to be different perspectives, right? You think about, I mean, let's take technology change. An end user in a call center is going to want a certain set of things. their manager is going to want to value a certain set of other things. The person paying for it is going to want something very different. And a customer who might never use that system, but they're still impacted by the changes that are made, by the, how quickly the person can respond, whether they've got the right information in front of them. So having that ability to say, okay, we need to co-create value in a way that works for you, and you, and ensure that no voices are marginalized unnecessarily, I think that's the more I'm saying this out loud, the more it's sounding quite arty.
It's maybe a blurry line. I'm not sure if it's a rhetorical question from Peter, but what benefit or value do they expect to achieve? I'm guessing this means by the sponsors and the project leaders, but I think it's more of a statement than a question as such. But what are they expecting to see? Do they just want a shiny new system, or do they want those business benefits that were inherent? So if you can remember the original question, Amanda, I can repeat.
No, I do remember. I do. Yeah. And I completely agree with Adrian. It really is a good question. It's something that I think we think about and have thought about a lot. And I couldn't agree more that actually what makes the job of a business analyst hard, or the hard part of it, is absolutely the people side of things. The complexity and challenges around technology, etc. That's what the tools and knowing how to sort of apply them to deal with those complexity makes easy. But the actual people side of things is really where the challenge lies. Relationship building is a key skill that we focus on in developing our business analysts. So, once you've mastered the tools and how to do your job, the next focus is very much on the people elements, because that's really how you're going to be successful. So it's not, and I think some business analysts have tainted things by focusing too much on the tools, because then they just get seen as either documenters. Basically, somebody just tells them something and they write it down. It needs to be so much more than that. And that's for me where the art is. So really knowing what questions to ask, when to challenge, how to navigate, facilitate. Those are all really very, as you say, Adrian, artsy stuff that takes a lot of work and practice to get right. So it's definitely a balance. And to me, I think you actually, you have to have the tools, but without the art, I think you're not going to be successful.
Okay, interesting. Craig.
Yeah, we obviously talked about this in the run up to the session. We had this conversation a number of times about what does this really mean, and I kind of likened it to a bit like an engineer. An engineer has a set of tools, a toolkit that they can use, and they get presented with different engineering problems to deal with. And part of the art and creativity of engineering is about, how do I take a set of tools and assemble them in a certain way to deliver an outcome? And of course, you can apply different engineers to the same problem, and they can come up with different solutions. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but you can see exactly the same thing happening with a business analyst. I do think that from my experience, that having worked with some analysts, that there are some that are very comfortable with applying the tools, right? They take the business analyst body of knowledge, and they take some of the tools and techniques, and they apply them as they were described in a very prescriptive way. But sometimes we have to recognize, again, I think Adrian mentioned it, the context is slightly different. So actually I might need to apply the tool in a slightly different way. I need to read the room and apply these tools in a way that makes sense and make sure that we are going to drive the benefit or the value for the particular audience that we're dealing with. And so, this isn't unique to business analysts, right? We see this in all sorts of roles. People will blindly apply the set of rules without adapting them to it. So I think that could sometimes speak to why people may have had a bad experience with it in the past. So I do think it's a case of people when developing analysts, that we do help them develop those types of skills, allow them to do that, to adapt more. But sometimes they might just not be that right type of person. So it's recognizing that that's the case as well, and that they have a particular skill set, but it might not be applicable in every case.
Yeah, I mean, Craig, if I could springboard off what you're saying, because I 100% agree with that. And I think one of the things that the toolkit is really, really broad. So you could have someone who is helping figure out some really messy problems and is nowhere near a solution yet. You could have someone who is defining field level, labels for, and everything in between. But there are situations where people use techniques just because either that's the done thing and don't question it, or because that's what they did last time. And so a provocative question, and this divides room, but a provocative question I sometimes like to ask is, okay, so you're following an agile methodology. Why are you using user stories? Right. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't. There's lots of good reasons to use user stories, but there are other alternatives as well. And and why aren't you using prototypes? Or and so I think, because there's actually nothing anywhere that says you have to use user stories with Agile, and there's certainly nothing that says you have to use it with the Scrum or Kanban or whatever. But it's kind of like folklore. And but Jira, but I don't care what Jira does or what MS DevOps or whatever type of thing. So you kind of get it's very easy to get stuck into the tools and get a little bit blindsided. Whereas actually the context might say, use cases, or actually let's just mock something up here. So I agree. I think it's about adapting. For an organization to be adaptable, after all, it needs its people, I suppose. Including BAs to adapt.
I think what's interesting about that is something that I've talked about quite a lot in the past, is that as specialists in helping businesses improve, we have to also be acutely aware of the fact that our own tools need to be developed and improved over time. And there's almost nothing worse than talking to in our world, a process improvement specialist who will say something like, well, I've been using the same tools for 20 years because they work for me. And it's like, but you're advising us, yes, they might work, but they must change over time.
Brilliant. Andy makes a comment about one of the issues is that analysts ask questions that people don't really want to answer. I think that's a fascinating, and it's completely obvious, in terms of it's exactly that.
Yeah.
How do you tackle that then? What's some of the advice around that? Is it more of a backing up by science and it's just blinding them with numbers, or you'll be back to the people side and how we, when, how, and some of the sort of softer side skills. So Amanda, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really just about positioning. So, I mean, if you're positioning why you need to ask that question, or what purpose it serves, or how, but it's very much in the people space, and knowing your audience, knowing, how to position things so that they'll hear the intent of it correctly. Very much in my, from my perspective, very much in the principles of that.
Indeed.
I was just going to add to that was at another part in my career, when I was doing a lot of consulting as a freelancer, I used to see it as a bit of a badge of honor or a mark of progress in the program or project when you'd upset somebody because you'd asked them something like this, because it meant that you were starting to disrupt those kind of old baked in ways of working in the organization. And it was okay as an outsider or freelancer to do that sort of thing, because actually if you got kicked off the project, you made everybody else happy, and you went on to the next one.
That's one of the things I had written down, is about in-house versus external. Business analysis. There must be a difference in terms of how you engage, or
it's interesting having worked both sides of that discussion, and I do think probably one of the hardest situations I found myself as an internal employed BA was when a senior person asked me to change a conclusion on a report, and I said no.
Mm-hmm.
And I said no because look, I can show my working. If my working is incorrect, then let's have a discussion. If you want to ignore the recommendation and make a different decision, that's your call.
Yeah.
But my recommendation based on the process you agreed up front is this. And I genuinely thought I was going to be fired. As it turns out, I wasn't. And it turned out to be actually probably something in that organization that boosted my career. But it was really uncomfortable. But for me, there was an ethical side to that, because, you know, if I don't question, if I don't challenge, and if they waste time, money, or create you know, situations, and I know this is, you know, often it's said, well, it's not life and death, is it? Well, you know what? If you were working on an electronic patient record system in a hospital, it could be, you know, or if you're working on a process which, you know, someone in dire needs to use, it could be. So it is much harder internally, but I think a good BA has to develop that resilience. But I think that's a work in progress for all of us, because it's hard.
Definitely easier as an outsider, because that's very much the role we play. But yeah, so I can understand that it would be quite challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my experience, I've seen BAs internally where their wings are almost clipped a bit, because yeah, it's all very well delivering bad news or answering that question that no one wants the answer to if you're external, because you can go home at the end of the day, you know, so to speak, or go on to the next project. But okay, so in terms of developing skills, then, in terms of the art and the science, the soft, the people, how does I'm going to ask Craig this time, because I think I'll be asking the other two first each time. So he hasn't got time to come up with his answer. So how does a BA ensure they develop the skills in both buckets? You know, is one easier than the other?
I think one definitely is easier than the other, because one of them is about picking up the books and reading and you know, seeing what other people do or have done. How do the tools work? I think the other side, a huge amount of it it comes down to experience. We know this. When you look back on your career and you think about how would I have made that decision 10 years ago versus now, you'll often see quite stark differences, because as you've grown, what you've learned, you know, you'd have seen more situations, so you'll have seen more sides of the same coin than others might have. Now, of course, that's not super helpful for a sort of fledgling BA setting out, going, actually, you won't be able to do this until you've got the experience. But you know, I think you've got to challenge yourself and challenge the boundaries. I go back to what I said, the little bit of conversation we had just before about recognizing that the tools you use, as good as they are and as proven as they've been, are never perfect, and that there's always scope to improve them. That means that, you know, if you've been taught by a seasoned BA to use a particular tool in a certain way, think about how you challenge that and use it in different ways, because that will create new ideas and new ways of doing things. I think, you know, that's the one sort of mindset, almost like an agile mindset, I would suggest that people take on. You know, notwithstanding all of the sort of soft skills type training or skills development that you could do as well.
Amanda, over to you. See, COO, you're probably looking at the next generation of BAs in your business. How do you develop both sides, and, you know, how do you make sure people?
Yeah, so I mean, it is very much about making sure you've got that learning mindset. So I mean, there's only so much reading and only so much training you can go on. At the end of the day, it's about purposeful practice, looking for those opportunities to put yourself out there. Looking for feedback, learning from feedback, and continuously just, you know, looking for those opportunities. So just doing something once doesn't mean you've mastered it. So it's something that you need to also be patient about and realize that it's different scenarios, different situations that are really going to help build that muscle, so to speak, from a soft skills perspective. And it takes time. It does take time. It's not something that'll happen overnight. And you need to, I think, kind of come to terms with that, and realize that, you know, over time you'll get there, but you should really just continue to look for those opportunities.
Adrian, what's your advice when it comes to developing skills for a BA?
Yeah, I'm nodding along with Amanda, and I really like that observation, that learning, right? Because let's get to the crux of agile and agility. It's about learning. It's about experimenting, learning, getting better, iterating, getting closer to whatever it is that we're trying, whatever product we're trying to co-create. And I think that learning mindset is so important. And I do think there's a like, we've probably all been in organizations where someone will say, oh, I've been doing this, I've got 30 years of experience in this job, or 20 years, or however many. And that can be, but the thing is, that can mean 30 years of diverse experience, or it can mean like the 30, 1 year repeated 30 times. I've heard someone refer to it as before, because it's actually quite a narrow situation. And both of those things have advantages, but I think one thing that I see in the business analysis world less now, and I think it's a good thing, but are like younger and newer voices not necessarily getting the airtime that they could do, because folks have grown up in with using tools differently, and so I think it's definitely a profession where number of years isn't always an indicator of breadth of experience. And you can have someone who's been doing the job for what on paper might seem a relatively short amount of time, but because of the engagements they've had, they might be far more suitable than someone who's got, however many years. So I just 100% agree with Amanda. And I think it's that diversity of the community that's important.
That's fascinating. I've definitely got recent experience, heard of the recent experience of a seasoned, well experienced BA, not exactly cutting the mustard for that exact reason. And wasn't sure if it was the lack of skills or lack of art, or maybe loss of passion. Sometimes I think that's sometimes passion to learn, passion to improve and challenge. Excellent. Well, we're coming to the top of the hour, but we do have some time for questions. So I've got one question, which was actually the first one asked, and it wasn't being ignored. It was quite a good question. I underlined the word as I think it was Amanda that introduced it, in fact. So you got time to put a question in if you want to ask the panelists anything now. But it was around agile, and it was about why is agile cloud the situation? What is it about agile which makes it, or is this another Scrum session in its own right, which we don't want to pull the plaster on? Amanda.
So I think it's because I think it depends on how people implement agile. So if it's really about focusing on just the practices and not the principles, that's where everything gets lost. And I've seen some of our clients like try and implement it to the T, and what would only work in a pure environment where agile could be implemented in that way, and it's completely fallen apart. And they actually got rid of business analysts and expected their business or product owners in the business to actually become business analysts or do the work of a business analyst, which is completely, everything we're talking about would explain why it's not possible. I mean, there's tools, there's skills, there's all of the stuff that you need to know. You can't just pick it up and do it. So I think it's just completely misunderstanding what you meant, like what agile means, and rather focusing on, it's focusing on the wrong things, unfortunately.
Brilliant. I was wondering again about the roles as well. They take out business analysts, but expect the roles, exactly. the tasks, exactly. The skills to be present, and maybe that's part of the problem.
I think that some aspects of agile though should bolster it, right? So a lot of the talk about creating cross-functional teams, like ideally you should have a BA in each team, but I think as you're saying, Amanda, sometimes it's the practices and the way they get implemented. I'll never forget years ago working with a systems architect for another software company, and we were talking about implementing agile practices, and he said we're implementing agile practices, but I'm never going to use that word, and I'm never going to say Scrum, because he said the minute I say Scrum, someone will come in one of our meetings and wave the book in the air and go, well, we're not doing it according to what it says here. And he said what we're trying to do is make it work for this particular team, which is something. So that was 10-12 years ago. It's always stuck with me, that.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? And this is why I sort of, in one of my previous chats was sort of, it's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes there's like agile with a capital A, and it's almost like agile incorporated, right? And I think sometimes it can be, and you know, the Scrum guide has it's far thinner than most people envisage it actually is. It doesn't really, you know, there's a lot in there. The Scrum guide, there's quite a lot in there. But yes, it doesn't have a BA role, but there's lots of other roles it doesn't have in there. It doesn't, you know, it's not precluding them. And I think sometimes it's sort of ironic. We were talking about context earlier. I think one of the things with Agile is it's been seen as a bit of by some organizations as a paint by numbers approach. You know, okay, well, as long as we do a daily stand up, and as long as we do it this and that and the other, and you know, but we also do need to sometimes question when, you know, who created these methods, who says they're right, who says they're wrong, and who says they're right now in this organization. Because my response to anyone who says there's no place for business analysis in Agile is, who said that, right? Because nobody with any you know, I don't think there has to be someone called a BA, right? Someone could have a different title, but there's business analysis happening in Agile. No, exactly. It's just like either being done well or badly.
Indeed. Last question before we move on to the networking, another one from Andy. So, interesting question. So is the trick to get the problem statement correct before letting the business analyst loose?
I like the idea of letting a business analyst loose. So I've been holding them back.
Release the analysts. Yeah. Anyone want to pick that one up?
I think the business analyst needs to help understand that problem statement.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was. That's why I thought it was an interesting question.
They need to do it,
isn't it? Yeah. You need those analysts, I think, to help form the.
If
to get that initial translation, from the business, and then
if there isn't one, you have to get it. So
and then understand the context, and then to challenge.
I remember having a conversation, and it might have been with you, Chris, a while ago. It was about does the business analyst come in, start working before or after the strategy? Yeah, and the answer was both. It's because before the strategy, it's where you don't know what you don't know, and you need to go and figure it out. And then after the strategy, it's you've picked a path, and we now need to drill down into that
and challenge it and evolve it.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Okay, I'm sure we could talk for another half hour on this, and but thank you all for engaging, and thanks for the questions from the audience as well. So what will happen now? We're gonna break out into smaller rooms. This is about networking. So talk, introduce yourself, share LinkedIn details and the like, and then have a chat about what we've been talking about. Really, if we have time, depending on how chatty you all are. But no, thanks to your time, and I'll pass over to Anna.
Great. Well, thank you guys very much. I'd just like to take a minute again just to say thank you so much to Adrian and Amanda for joining us this evening, and really showing some really great insights there, some really, really interesting topics of conversation. I have to say, when I was looking at it, I was thinking, I'm looking forward to editing this video and getting it up, because there's some really great sound bites there. So thank you so much. And for everyone else for attending, it's nice to see everyone. We will have Scrum again probably before the end of the year, so we'll be in touch. But otherwise, have a fantastic evening, and we'll hope to see you again at the next Scrum event.